Mishpucha, it's Courtney, America's Jewish mother. Welcome back to my channel, and I'm here today to do a wrap-up of my goals for 2021. So this year I had 3 primary reading goals, and those were, number 1, my own personal Arab American literature project challenge, where every month I read one book by an Arab American writer. Number 2, I wanted to read 2 project books this year, and I would classify a project book as anything that's over 500 pages personally. But the 2 project books that I wanted to read were Moby-Dick by Herman Melville and The Essential Writings of Ralph Waldo Emerson. And the 3rd goal was that I wanted to participate in the 2021 Reading Women Challenge, and honestly, it's a good thing that I did that last one because it is no more, so that's really sad, actually. So anyway, so let's see how I did with each of those 3 goals. So for my own personal Arab American literature project, I'm happy to report that I did indeed meet that goal, and I read 12 books throughout the year, each of which was written by an Arab American writer. Now I think one month, I think maybe my pick for September, I started in September and didn't actually finish it until October, but whatever, I still read 12 books. So I did do that. So I ended up reading 2 books by writers of Palestinian heritage, 2 books by writers of Lebanese heritage, 2 by authors of Egyptian heritage, 2 by authors of Syrian heritage, 2 by writers of Libyan heritage, 1 by an author of Moroccan heritage, and 1 by an author of Jordanian heritage. So I'm just going to go through each of the months and tell you what I read for each of those months. So for January, I read Etaf Rum's A Woman Is No Man. I really enjoyed this book overall, and I did a single standalone review of it, which I will link down below. It was definitely one of my top books that I read for this project during this year. It's pretty much a love letter to books, which I really appreciated that aspect of it. And also it probably helps that the author of that book lives in my hometown, so I kind of felt like I was supporting a hometown writer in that respect. Then in February, I read a short story collection by Joseph Geha called Through and Through. This ended up getting a 3.5-star rating for me. It was just kind of fine. I like some of the stories better than others, so for me that's pretty standard as far as the short story collection goes. Then in March, I read Naomi Shihab Nye's collection of poetry, Transfer. I also quite liked this overall. It's about place and connection to a sense of place, and also it's about the writer's grief over the death of her father and who she is after his death. So this was definitely also one of my favorite reads that I did of this project that I would definitely recommend. Then in March, I read another poetry collection by Khaled Mattawa called Tocqueville. And this one was kind of confusing to me. It's a very interesting collection that does a lot of cool experimental things like matrices. I don't think I'd ever seen that done in a poetry collection before, but it was also confusing, and I didn't really think I had all of the pieces to put everything together. Then in May, I read Evelyn Shakir's collection of short stories, Remember Me to Lebanon. Evelyn Shakir is pretty much a pioneer of the study of Arab American literature in the U.S. So she, like I said, she was pretty much a pioneer of that and studied it in mainly the 80s and 90s, and there's now an award named after her that is given by the same people who give the Arab American Book Award. So I read her short story collection and again enjoyed it overall. It was kind of mid-level for me. Then in June, I thankfully managed to find a Pride Month themed read for this. So I read Zeyn Joukhadar's The 30 Names of Night. So this is by a trans author. And this had some elements of magical realism in it. It didn't totally work for me. But what do I know? It also won a Lambda Literary Award, so, by all means, go pick it up. You might like it better than I did. In July, I read Samia Serageldin's The Cairo House, which is pretty much thinly veiled autobiography of her own youth and time in Egypt during a revolutionary period of change, and what things are like for her sort of before and after that. And this, again, didn't totally work for me, but still glad that I read it. Then in August, I read Diana Abu-Jaber's Arabian Jazz, and this is probably the one that I liked the least out of all of the books that I read, but I did feel like it had strong, well-drawn characters in it. It just kind of didn't go anywhere plot-wise. It just kind of spun its wheels around and around and around. So even though it had these nicely drawn characters, again, it just kind of didn't go anywhere, so it didn't work for me. Then in September, I read Dima Alzayat's Alligator and Other Stories, and again, this was kind of like a mid-level short story collection for me. I liked a few of the stories, other ones I couldn't remember now, but there are at least two of them that I read that I quite liked and still remember, so that's not bad. Then in October, I read Pauline Kaldas's Egyptian Compass, which is also a poetry collection. Again, this got kind of like a mid-level rating from me. Liked it overall. Would probably recommend it. Then in November, I read Laila Lalami's The Moor's Account. This is probably my favorite book of this whole project. It's maybe tied with the book I read for December. So yeah, this was just a really great book, historical fiction about the first Arab Muslim explorer in the United States, told in the style of a travelogue narrative, like the interesting narrative of the life of Waldo Equiano. Yeah, really good, really powerful. Loved the sort of subversion of the explorer and the theme of explorers and who gets to tell stories, and who takes positions of leadership, and what does freedom mean, and how do we achieve it, and just like, yeah, and also like I love that it had kind of like a sense of optimism about it too, so this is definitely one of my favorites of the whole thing. And then in December, I read Hisham Mattar's In the Country of Men, which I don't actually think I've wrapped up yet on this channel, but I really like this overall. It's about a boy, a 9-year-old boy named Suleiman in Libya, after a revolutionary period where now people who speak against the mainstream leader, the Gaddafi regime, are basically silenced. And it's about basically Suleiman's father he goes into hiding, or he's taken into custody, and how that affects Suleiman and his mother as a result. This was really good, and again, probably ties with the Moor's Account for my favorite that I read of this whole project. So yeah, so I will list all of those books down below if you want to go check any of them out. So that was goal number 1, check. I would call that a highly successful project overall, and I think of all of these 12 books that I read, I think I rated 8 of the 12 of them 3.5 stars or higher, which I think is a really good overall average as far as Arab American literature goes, right? So it's like, you know, two-thirds of them basically I thought were good to very good to even great. So yeah, really successful project, and I'm pleased that I'm gonna do something similar in the coming year with Asian American literature. So that was goal number 1. Goal number 2 was for me to read my 2 project books, which were Moby-Dick and the Essential Writings of Ralph Waldo Emerson. So I read Moby-Dick in the first quarter of this year. I did that as a buddy read with Melissa of Fully Booked. I also have a standalone review of Moby-Dick, which I will link down below. Spoiler alert, I super loved it. So yeah, so we read this, so Melissa Fully Booked and I read this from January to March. So it took not quite 3 full months for us to get through it, and I think it was good that we took it at a slow, kind of leisurely pace. I think that helped increase my enjoyment and appreciation of it overall. And then the second project book I wanted to get through was The Essential Writings of Ralph Waldo Emerson, which, if you've been following my channel for, you know, more than like 2 months or whatever, I'm sure you've seen me talk about that book before, because I was basically reading it from May until November. But I did finally finish it, so I'm happy to have finally gotten around to reading that tome, because that is a book that I'd read several essays and pieces out of for my comprehensive exams in American Pragmatism in graduate school. But, you know, Emerson's always, I think, a really great and a great read, an insightful read, beautiful writing, really leaves you thinking. So I'm really glad to have read both of those books. So check goal number 2. And then Goal number 3 was I wanted to participate in the 2021 Reading Women Challenge, and I'm happy to say that I completed all 24 prompts. I did not get any of the bonus authors, but I did do all 24 prompts, which I will now review at this time. I'll also add here that a few of the prompts I felt like were too specific and not really aligned with what I like to personally read, so I amended them slightly. To better fit my own reading taste. So I will note that when I get to those prompts. So, but I'm still considering this completed. So these are not in the order that they're listed on the little chart on the Reading Women website. So sorry, they're out of order. But so here are the books I read. So one prompt was to read a book about incarceration. So for that I read Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, which is excellent and I highly recommend it. Then I was supposed to read a book with a cover design by a woman. For this I counted Cynthia Ozick's Antiquities, which I absolutely loved, but I could also have counted Laila Lalami's The Moor's Account, which also has a cover design by a woman, so I'm sure I probably read multiple books that would fit that aside from just those two, but those are the two that I actually remembered. Then you're supposed to reread a favorite, so for that I reread Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, which of course was excellent and is my personal favorite of all of Toni Morrison's novels. A poetry collection by a black woman, so for this I reread another favorite of mine, Lucille Clifton's Mercy. And if you haven't read Lucille Clifton's poetry, I highly, highly recommend her. She is great. An author from Eastern Europe, so I read Olga Tokarczuk's Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, although I could actually count my recent finishing of Olga Tokarczuk's The Books of Jacob. But I'll count Drive Your Plow because it's also focused on a woman character, Janina. So that was really great, and I was very happy to have read that. It has now ignited a love of Olga Tokarczuk in me. So I'm now going to go read all of Olga Tokarczuk's books that have been translated into English. Then a nonfiction about social justice. So for this, I actually counted a book that I read for the BookTube Prize, which was Jessica Goudeau's After the Last Border. This tells the stories of two women who come to the U.S. as refugees at different points. So one woman who comes from, oh shoot, now I don't remember where, I don't remember where she comes from now. I'll put it around here somewhere. But her story, Muna, starts once she's actually in the United States. And then the other woman, Hasna, her story, she is from Syria, and her story kind of tells you the lead up to how she ends up becoming a refugee who comes to the United States. So it's an interweaving of their two stories along with some history about refugee resettlement and government policy surrounding refugee resettlement in the United States. And I really loved it. I thought it was wonderful narrative nonfiction. And yeah, I couldn't wait to like go and pick it back up. And then once I finished it, I was kind of sad because I was like, oh, I've like enjoyed spending time with Hasna and Muna. So yeah, that was definitely one of my better reads this year. Then a book long listed for the JCB Prize, which is a prize that's given to a work of Indian literature. So for this, I read Annie Zaidi's Prelude to a Riot. And this was a book that was hard for me to get a hold of, but I ended up really liking it. It's told from a number of different perspectives, which I usually don't like in books, but for whatever reason, this one worked for me. And it's a pretty short book. I think it's under 200 pages. But there was just something about it that I found really compulsively readable, and I liked all of the kind of different narrative perspectives that, when woven together, give you a sense of you know, this city and this country at this particular moment in time. So also a particularly good read. Then there's a prompt to read a YA novel by a Latinx author. And as you know, I'm not a reader of YA much at all. So I changed this prompt to an adult fiction novel by a Latinx author. So for this, I read Julia Alvarez's Afterlife, which I also really quite enjoyed. This is also a book that's in some ways kind of a love letter to books, and I'm pretty much a sucker for that. So then a crime novel or thriller in translation. So for this, I read Helene Tursten's An Elderly Lady is Up to No Good, which I'm sure you've heard me talk about more than once on this channel, and how much I enjoyed that. And it's just fun. It's fun. So yeah, I now can't wait to read An Elderly Lady Must Not Be Crossed, which is the sequel. Still haven't gotten to that. Probably gonna do it next year though. A cookbook by a woman of color. So this is something that I was like, yeah, this is too specific and I would never read a cookbook. So instead, I changed it to a nonfiction book by a woman of color. So for this I read, again, a book for the BookTube Prize, Catherine Cho's Inferno, which is about the author's experience with postpartum psychosis, which was excellent and I highly recommend it. So yeah. Then a protagonist older than 50. So again, I had a couple of these that would count for this. The Helene Thurston book would count, but I decided to count Agatha Christie's The Body in the Library, which is the second book in the Miss Marple series, which I also quite enjoyed. Then a Muslim middle grade novel. So again, I don't really read middle grade very much, if at all. So I changed this to a Muslim literary fiction novel, and for that I read Fatima Farheen Mirza's A Place for Us, which was one of the finalists in the inaugural BookTube Prize in 2019. Liked it overall, would recommend it, glad to know what all the hype was about. Then a rural setting. So for this I read Attica Locke's Bluebird, which is the first in the Highway 59 series, which stars Texas Ranger Darren Matthews and takes place in East Texas, which is definitely a rural setting. Then a book about a woman in politics. So for this, I read Stacey Abrams' While Justice Sleeps, which was kindly sent to me by Sandy of Ms. Reeselot. So thank you again, Sandy. So I think everybody's heard about the Stacey Abrams book, so I'm not really going to belabor this here. But yeah, so basically it's about a woman who clerks for a Supreme Court justice and then ends up being put in charge of his decision making after he goes into a coma, and I forget what the actual legal term is for that. I'll put it here somewhere. So that was that. Then a biracial protagonist. So for this I read Regina Porter's The Travelers, which was a book gifted to me by Lindsay in our holiday book exchange last year, so thank you, Lindsay. A book by a neurodivergent author. For this I read Sonia Renee Taylor's The Body Is Not an Apology, which is about basically kind of like diet culture and yeah, and basically body positivity and things of that sort. And she says in the book that she is neurodivergent, so I was like, boom, I can count this. Then short stories by a Caribbean author. So for this I read Jamaica Kincaid's At the Bottom of the River, which is very short and has a lot of lovely descriptive writing in it. Then a South American author in translation. So I recently reread a collection of poetry by Alejandra Pizarnik called The Galloping Hour. This is a book that I first read in 2019 and did not love, but I did have slightly more appreciation for it upon reread, so I bumped up the ratings by one star. Then a book about the natural world. So for this I read Rebecca Ragg Sykes' Kindred, which again was also for the BookTube Prize. This is about Neanderthals. I could have also counted the book that I ended up counting for a memoir by an indigenous woman, which I'll get to in a minute. Then a queer love story. So for that I read Chinelo Operanta's Love Under the Idolatries, which is about two young Nigerian girls who fall in love and have a forbidden romance kind of thing. Then a memoir by an indigenous woman. So for this I read Ernestine Hayes' Blonde Indian, which definitely talks a lot about nature and the natural world. So again, I could have counted it for the other prompt as well. Then a fantasy novel by an Asian author. So again, I don't read fantasy, so I changed this to a contemporary novel by an Asian author. So for this I read Susie Yang's White Ivy, which is a book that talks about, sort of assimilation and kind of the price you pay to be like a rich wasp, more or less, in American society. A book by a trans author. I could have counted actually no, just kidding, scratch that. I was gonna say I could have checked the book that I read for my American Literature project, but that's not right because that was written by a trans man. So this book that I'm about to tell you is written by a trans woman, Casey Plett, A Safe Girl to Love. So this is a collection of short stories. I didn't love it, but it was interesting to read short stories from the perspective of a trans woman. And I think it does give you a good insight into a specific kind of trans experience of the world. And then the last prompt was an Arab author in translation, and I tried and DNF'd 2 different books for this prompt, but I'm still going to count it as completed because I did attempt to read these 2 books. So one was Ghada Al-Saman's Farewell Damascus, and the other was Joka Al-Harthi's Celestial Bodies. And again, both of these were DNFs for me. But because I've already, I already this year was doing my own personal Arab American literature project, I figured it's alright, I'm already reading a lot of Arab literature anyway, it's just Arab American literature rather than Arab literature in translation. But again, because I did try to read both of these two books for this prompt, I'm still going to count that as technically completed. So, that is everything that I set as a goal for myself in 2021. So, just to recap, Arab American Literature Project, check. Read the two project books, Moby-Dick and Emerson, check. Participate in the 2021 Reading Women Challenge, check. So boom, 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 hit all my goals. I feel really good about that. So please let me know if you have thoughts about any of these things that I've mentioned. Let me know how you did with your own personal goals for 2021. Let me know if you've set specific goals for 2022. I'm definitely enjoying watching people's goals for next year videos recently. So thank you for watching this. I hope everyone is staying healthy and well. I hope you're doing good reading whatever you're reading. And until next time, what did Khaled call you, mother?